The sharp click of Kemi's heels echoed through the marble floors of Richard's penthouse, causing every head in the room to turn. 7 years ago, she had been discarded like a broken toy, pregnant, penniless, and humiliated by her billionaire husband and his mistress. Now, with grace and an air of quiet strength, she stepped into their world, ready to make them regret every moment they had tortured her. Kemi was a woman who had once been rich in love, even if her bank account didn't reflect it. Married to Richard Olayemi, a self-made billionaire in the oil industry, she had felt like the luckiest woman alive. Their life together in the heart of Lagos was the epitome of luxury. From their sprawling mansion in Lekki to private jets and endless parties that made the rest of the city envy them. But as the saying goes, all that glitters is not gold. Richard, who had been her college sweetheart, changed the moment he tasted the power that came with his wealth. The man who had once vowed to cherish her now looked at her as if she were merely an accessory to his newfound status. And there was the mistress, Chica, a model whose looks matched the glitzy life Richard now sought and whose presence started to haunt every corner of their marriage. Kemi, now pregnant with their first child, had expected Richard to be by her side through the ups and downs. Instead, he withdrew, becoming more distant with each passing day, indulging in late-night meetings and extravagant parties with Chica, his new obsession. Kemi's world began to crumble as Richard grew colder, dismissing her concerns about their marriage and the mounting tension between them. Then came the day everything changed. Kemi had returned from a routine checkup to find her things thrown out onto the street, and Richard coldly informed her that she had no place in his life anymore. She was pregnant and vulnerable, but none of that seemed to matter. Richard had chosen Chica, and in his eyes, Kemi was no longer a part of the picture. Alone, rejected, and humiliated, Kemi left the mansion that had once felt like home. Little did they know that this would be the last time they would see her broken. Kemi sat on the edge of the dilapidated couch in her small two-room apartment, staring at the ultrasound picture of her baby. The weight of her rejection from Richard and the cruel dismissal of her pregnancy still felt raw, but there was no time to mourn. She had no choice but to survive, for herself and for the child she carried. The harsh Lagos sun poured in through the cracked window, bathing the room in a heat that felt like a constant reminder of her struggle. For the first time in her life, Kemi had been forced to learn what it meant to depend solely on her own strength. Her once comfortable world had turned into one of constant hustle, searching for freelance design work, navigating the chaos of a city that had no sympathy for the weak. Each day was a battle. The stigma of being a single mother in a society that valued appearances above all else weighed heavily on her shoulders. Yet through it all, she refused to crumble. Her child, the only piece of her life that was still intact, was her reason to push forward. But just when things seemed like they couldn't get worse, an unexpected phone call changed everything. The voice on the other end of the line was familiar, but it took Kemi a moment to place it. "Hello, Kemi," the voice said, smooth yet with a hint of urgency. "It's Tunde. I have something you might want to know." Kemi's heart skipped a beat. Tunde. The same Tunde who had once been Richard's closest friend, the man who had been a brother to her, had quietly disappeared from her life after the fallout. The one person she never expected to hear from again. He had been there during her happier times, long before Richard's heart turned cold, and before Chica had entered the picture. "What is it?" Kemi asked, her voice steady, though her mind raced. She felt a surge of uncertainty. What could Tunde want now? After everything that had happened, it felt almost surreal. "I've been following up on Richard, and there's something you need to know," Tunde replied cryptically. There was a long pause before he continued. "Richard and Chica, they're not just playing house. They're involved in something dangerous, Kemi, and it's getting worse." Kemi's grip tightened on the phone as her pulse quickened. Dangerous? What could he possibly mean? Tunde wasn't one to exaggerate, but this felt different. He wasn't giving her the full picture, and the mystery was driving her mad. "Why are you telling me this?" Kemi asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Her instincts screamed that this was no random call. There was something more, something that would finally expose the betrayal that had shattered her life. Tunde hesitated, because I can't let you get dragged into it all over again. If you think you've seen the worst of Richard, you're wrong. There's more to this story, and it's going to affect you and your child. Kemi's breath caught. The last words he spoke lingered in her mind. It's going to affect you. Richard, her husband, had been hiding something that could shake the foundations of the life he had carefully crafted with Chica. The thoughts were like a storm inside her head, each revelation adding weight to the already heavy burden she carried. But what was it? What was the secret they were keeping? Tunde's cryptic message only deepened the mystery. She knew that Tunde was always one to avoid getting caught in the crossfire, but there was something about his warning that made her think twice. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about something much bigger, something that could unravel the lies and the facade Richard and Chica had built. But before she could ask anything more, Tunde abruptly ended the call, leaving Kemi in a state of confusion and fear. What was he trying to tell her? Why had he reached out after all this time? The tension in her chest grew with every unanswered question. Kemi knew she had to act quickly. Whatever Richard and Chica were involved in, it was a threat, one that wasn't just about them anymore. It was about her and the life she'd been trying so desperately to rebuild. She wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not this time. The days following Tunde's call felt like an endless spiral. Kemi couldn't shake the feeling that something dark was looming over her. The mystery of Richard's and Chica's involvement in something dangerous gnawed at her, and it felt like the pieces of her past were now converging with the present in a way she couldn't control. Each day was filled with sleepless nights, where her thoughts spiraled between anger, confusion, and an overwhelming desire for answers. She knew she had to take action, but where to begin? Tunde's cryptic words echoed in her mind, urging her to dig deeper, yet every time she tried to piece together what was really going on, a wall of silence kept her at bay. Kemi's world was one of constant motion, but it felt like everything had slowed to a crawl after the call. It was as if she was walking on a tightrope, and one misstep could send her tumbling into a reality she wasn't ready to face. One evening, as she sat in front of her laptop, trying to focus on freelance work to make ends meet, her phone buzzed again. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but the area code indicated it was from a Lagos-based number. Hesitating for only a moment, Kemi answered the call. "Hello?" she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the uncertainty that buzzed in her chest. "Kemi?" The voice on the other end was familiar but gruff, one that instantly made her stomach twist in recognition. It was Richard's lawyer, and the last time they spoke had been during the chaotic and painful divorce proceedings 7 years ago. "I need to speak with you about something important," the lawyer said, his tone formal. "Richard is requesting a meeting with you." Kemi's blood ran cold. Richard? After all these years? The audacity to come back into her life after everything he'd done was almost too much to bear. She'd sworn she wouldn't allow him back into her world, not after the cruel way he had treated her, but her curiosity got the better of her. What was it that he wanted now? "I'm not interested in meeting with Richard," she responded, her voice firm. She had been resolute in her decision to cut him out of her life, and she wasn't about to let him manipulate her again. "I understand, but you need to hear this," the lawyer pressed. "It's about the child, the company too. You have some responsibilities." Her heart raced. What could he possibly mean by responsibilities? The last time she checked, she had no ties to Richard's business or his new life. "No," she said, this time more forcefully. "I'm done with him." The call ended, but Kemi's thoughts refused to quiet. Richard's desire to pull her back into his life, into whatever mess he had created, was something she couldn't ignore. And there was more at play than just her. Her child was a part of this, a piece of the puzzle that neither she nor Richard had ever truly understood. Days passed, but Kemi's restlessness grew. She tried to focus on her work, trying to build her own future, but everything felt like it was teetering on the edge. The weight of uncertainty kept pressing down on her until one evening she received a package delivered to her apartment. It was an envelope, plain and unmarked, except for her name scrawled on the front. Inside, she found a document, a property deed for a house in the outskirts of Lagos. The letter accompanying it was brief but chilling. "This is where we begin." Kemi's pulse quickened as she read the note. She had no idea what this house had to do with anything, but the eerie feeling it left behind was undeniable. Someone was watching her, playing a game with her life. Her mind spun with possibilities. Could Richard really be involved in something criminal? The tension between them, the way he had discarded her so callously, suddenly seemed to make more sense. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything Richard had done was part of a much bigger picture, a scheme that had been in motion long before he had kicked her out. The question burned inside her. What had he gotten himself involved in, and what role did she play in it? Kemi knew one thing for sure. Whatever game Richard and Chica were playing, she was no longer going to sit on the sidelines. She would uncover the truth, even if it meant facing the very people who had destroyed her life. Determined to find answers, she packed a small bag and prepared to visit the address listed on the deed. Her steps were purposeful, but the sense of unease deepened as she prepared to walk into the unknown. She was no longer the weak, pregnant woman who had been tossed out. This time, she was prepared to reclaim her life and to make Richard and Chica regret the day they crossed her. Kemi's heart raced as the sleek black car made its way through the narrow potholed roads of the outskirts of Lagos. The address on the deed led her to an area far removed from the glitz and glamour of the city she once knew. Here, the buildings were worn, the air thick with dust, and the people seemed to move more slowly, as if time itself had given up on this place. It was a stark contrast to the opulence of Richard's world. The house stood on a desolate corner, its exterior aged and weathered, surrounded by overgrown shrubs and a high gate that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. A sense of foreboding washed over Kemi as she stepped out of the car. The tension from the past weeks, the sleepless nights, and the cryptic messages seemed to converge in this one moment. She had no idea what she was walking into, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. Taking a deep breath, she approached the gate, the sound of her shoes against the gravel feeling like a drumbeat in the silence. The gate creaked open slowly, revealing a long, dark path that led to the front door. The house loomed ahead like a relic of some long-forgotten time, its silence almost suffocating. As Kemi reached the front door, her fingers hovered over the doorknob. She could feel her pulse thumping in her ears, but she steeled herself and turned it. The door opened with a soft groan, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The air was stale, thick with the scent of something long uninhabited. She stepped inside, and the door swung shut behind her, its echo deep in the silence. "Hello," Kemi called out, her voice trembling slightly, but the house remained eerily quiet. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, to turn around and forget this entire ordeal, but something far stronger than fear, kept her rooted to the spot. Her eyes scanned the darkened hallway. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it, a figure standing in the shadows. It was Chica. Kemi's breath caught in her throat. The last person she wanted to see, standing in front of her, was the woman who had taken everything from her, her husband, her life, her dignity. Chica's eyes were cold, but there was something else in them now, an edge of fear. "You shouldn't be here," Chica said, her voice low, almost strained. Kemi took a step forward, the heat of rage flooding her chest. "Why, Chica? Why did you do it? Why did you help Richard ruin me?" Chica's gaze flickered for a moment, and in that brief instant, Kemi saw vulnerability. It was fleeting, but it was enough to make her pause, but only for a moment. The pain and anger of the last 7 years surged back in a rush, and Kemi took another step forward, her hands shaking with fury. "What are you involved in?" Kemi demanded. "What is Richard hiding, and why did he drag me into this?" Chica looked away, her fingers twitching nervously. "I never wanted it to be like this," she whispered, almost as if speaking to herself. "I was just trying to survive. You think I had a choice?" Kemi stared at her, the woman who had been complicit in her torment. You think I had a choice? You took my life from me. I was pregnant, Chica. I had nowhere to go, and you were right there watching. Chica's face contorted with emotion, a crack in her usual icy exterior. Richard is not who you think he is. He's not the man you married. You have no idea what he's become. Kimmy's chest tightened. What do you mean? Chica hesitated, then met Kemi's eyes, her expression one of reluctant truth. He's involved in illegal arms deals, money laundering. You don't understand what kind of monster he's become. And she looked away again, her voice faltering. I got dragged into it, just like you, but I couldn't escape. Kemi stood there, her heart pounding as the pieces finally began to fit together. All the cryptic messages, the warnings from Tunde, the strange behavior from Richard, it all made sense now. Richard had crossed a line far beyond betrayal. He had become entangled in a world of crime, and Chica, despite her own guilt, was trapped in it. But then, in the midst of her rage, something shifted inside Kemi. The girl who had been discarded, the woman who had spent years struggling in the shadows, suddenly saw the truth not just about Richard and Chica, but about herself. I don't need you or Richard to tell me what my life is worth, Kemi said, her voice steady and resolute. You destroyed me once, but I'm no longer the woman I was 7 years ago. You've made a mistake if you think you can control me. Chica looked at her, stunned, as if the words had knocked the wind out of her. Kemi took a deep breath and stepped back. I'm done with you. Done with him. I came here for answers, and now I have them. But this isn't the end. It's only the beginning. Kemi turned and walked toward the door, every step echoing with the strength she had gained over the past 7 years. The woman who had been broken had returned, and this time, she wasn't going to let anyone, Richard, Chica, or anyone else, define her future. The battle for her dignity had only just begun. Kemi's heart was still pounding as she left the house, the weight of Chica's words still swirling in her mind. Richard was involved in something far darker than she had ever imagined. Her husband, the man she had once trusted with her life, was a criminal. No, worse than that, a ruthless, calculating individual who had dragged her into a world she could never have foreseen. The thought was suffocating, as if her entire past had been a lie, wrapped in a web of deceit she had never been able to see. Yet, even with all the answers she had received, Kemi wasn't sure how to proceed. She had confronted Chica, and now, more than ever, she felt the weight of the decisions that lay ahead of her. What was her next move? Could she expose Richard and bring him to justice? Was she even strong enough to face him again after everything he had done? The car ride back to her apartment was agonizingly slow, each minute dragging on as if the world around her had paused. She needed to think, to process everything. But as the cityscape blurred past her, one thought was repeated over and over in her head. What now? That evening, Kemi decided to go to bed early, hoping sleep would offer her the clarity she desperately needed. But instead of sleep, the nightmares returned. Visions of Richard's cold eyes, of Chica's cruel smile, of her own helplessness as she was cast out of the life she had once loved. The fear and pain of the past crept back in, filling the silence of her room, and she was powerless to escape it. In the middle of the night, her phone buzzed. The screen flashed a name she hadn't expected to see. It was Tunde. Without hesitation, she answered the call. Kemi, Tunde's voice came through, filled with urgency. You need to listen to me. Richard knows you're on to him. He's watching you. Kemi's blood ran cold. What do you mean? There are people watching your apartment. He knows you've been asking questions. He's dangerous, Kemi. More dangerous than you know. You have to get out of there now. Her breath caught in her throat. He knows? What are you talking about, Tunde? How can you be sure? She demanded, panic rising in her chest. I've been following the trail, Kemi. He's involved in some serious things that go beyond business. There are people who will stop at nothing to protect him. You're in over your head, and you're running out of time. The words hung heavy in the air. Kemi had always known that Richard was ruthless, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. A sinking feeling settled in her stomach, and for the first time since she had left him, she realized that the battle she was about to face wasn't just with her ex-husband and his mistress. it was with forces far more dangerous. "I can't just leave," she whispered, her mind racing. "I have to confront him. I have to expose him." "No," Tunde said sharply. "This isn't just about exposing him anymore. This is about survival. You don't understand what you're dealing with. If you stay in Lagos, they'll find you, Kemi. You need to leave now." Kemi's hands trembled as she held the phone, the weight of his words sinking in. She was no longer fighting for justice or revenge. She was fighting for her life and the life of her unborn child. "Please, just listen to me," Tunde continued. "I know this is hard, but you can't stay. I'll help you. I have a place you can go, somewhere safe. We'll figure it out from there. But you have to leave, tonight." Kemi hung up the phone and sat in the darkness of her apartment, her mind spinning. The man she had once called her partner, her lover, was now someone who would stop at nothing to protect his empire, and she was standing in the way. In a daze, she packed a small bag, the urgency of Tunde's words echoing in her mind. She knew she couldn't stay. Not with Richard's people watching her every move, not with the danger closing in around her. Her escape wasn't just an option anymore. It was a necessity, but the thought of running again, of being pushed out yet again, was a bitter pill to swallow. She wasn't the scared, pregnant woman she had been 7 years ago. But she wasn't naive enough to think she could face Richard and his criminal associates head-on without risking everything. The moment Kemi stepped out of her apartment, she felt the weight of her decision settle heavily on her shoulders. She was walking away, not just from the life she had once known, but from everything that had defined her. It felt like betrayal, not to Richard, but to herself. Yet in this moment of crisis, survival was her only priority. As the door clicked shut behind her, Kemi knew that this wasn't the end. It wasn't even the beginning of the end. It was only the beginning of a much larger war. A war for her future. A war that would see Richard and Chika regret the day they crossed her. Kemi's heart thundered in her chest as she stood at the edge of the rooftop, the night air cold against her skin. Below, the city of Lagos spread out like an endless sea of lights, chaotic, vibrant, and alive. But for Kemi, everything felt still. The storm inside her had quieted, and in its place was a calm resolve. She had spent the last few days running, hiding, and trying to piece together what was happening with Richard, with Chika, with everything that had been torn apart. Tunde had kept his promise, helping her get to safety, providing a temporary haven from the web of danger that Richard had spun. But now, standing on the precipice of a new chapter, she realized something. She had been running long enough. It was time to confront the truth, time to face Richard, Chika, and her own fears head-on. The decision had been brewing for days, simmering beneath the surface of every conversation, every anxious glance, and every sleepless night. But it wasn't until the moment Tunde, with all his concern, had looked her in the eye and told her, "You don't need to be afraid of him anymore," that Kemi truly understood. Richard was a coward. He hid behind power, wealth, and manipulation, but in the end, he was nothing without his empire of lies. With that knowledge came her transformation. The woman who had once been discarded, vulnerable, and at the mercy of those who had wronged her, had now become someone unrecognizable. She was no longer the timid wife. She was a mother, a survivor, and most importantly, she was a woman who had learned the true strength of her own voice. The path had been set before her, and now there was no turning back. She had no intention of hiding anymore, no matter what Richard or his associates might do to stop her. She would stand tall in the face of their wrath, and most importantly, she would take control of her own future. Her phone rang. It was Richard. The arrogance in his voice when he spoke sent a sharp spike of anger through Kemi's veins. "Kemi," he said, his tone dripping with entitlement, "I know you're still hiding. I know you're scared, but this is where it ends. You don't get to walk away from me. You'll come back. You'll see things my way." His words were a final attempt to break her, to remind her of her place in his world. But instead of cowering, Kemi held the phone tighter, her grip tightening with the strength of someone who had nothing left to lose. "I'm not scared of you anymore, Richard," she said, her voice steady but fierce. "I'm not the woman you threw out 7 years ago. I've seen the truth, and I've built a life for myself and my child. What I have now is worth more than all the money and power you think you control, and I'm going to make sure the world knows who you really are." For a moment, there was silence on the other end. Then Richard laughed, low and mocking, as if he couldn't fathom what she was saying. "You think you can stop me?" he sneered. "You think you can bring me down?" "I know I can," Kemi replied, her voice growing stronger, each word a declaration of her new self. "Because I've already won. You'll see. I'm going to expose everything you've been hiding." Before Richard could respond, Kemi ended the call. She was done with him. She was done with the past. Her transformation was complete. Kemi was no longer a victim. She was a force. She had found her power, not in revenge, but in her ability to face the very people who had broken her, without flinching. She had learned to live for herself, to trust in her instincts, and to fight for the future of her child. Richard might still hold the keys to his empire, but Kemi held the keys to her own life, and that was more than enough. With a final glance at the Lagos skyline, Kemi made her decision. She would take everything she knew about Richard's criminal activities and use it to bring him down. She would expose him, take away his power, and free herself from the shadow he had cast over her life. The Kemi who had once begged for Richard's love, the Kemi who had endured years of torment, was gone. In her place stood a woman ready to rewrite her own story. It was time for Richard and Chica to face the consequences of their actions. It was time for her to reclaim her dignity and her future. The weeks that followed felt like a blur to Kemi. Her plan was in motion. With the evidence she had gathered and the help of a few key allies, she began the painstaking process of exposing Richard's criminal empire. The network of corruption, the money laundering, the illegal arms deals, it all came to light. The public backlash was swift, and the authorities, no longer blind to the truth, moved quickly to dismantle everything Richard had built. It was a moment of vindication, but Kemi felt something unexpected, a sense of peace. The anger she had held onto for so long, the resentment that had once consumed her, had started to fade. She no longer needed to see Richard punished to feel whole. The closure had come, not in the form of his downfall, but in the realization that she had reclaimed herself, her power, and her future. Richard's downfall was swift. He was arrested, tried, and convicted, his empire crumbling under the weight of the crimes he had committed. The media swarmed him, his image shattered as the truth about his treachery and cruelty spread across the country. But Kemi didn't watch the news. She didn't care about the spectacle. Her focus was on what lay ahead, on the child she had fought for, on the life she was now free to live without fear. Kemi stood in front of her new home, the sun setting behind her, casting a golden glow on the future she had built with her own hands. It wasn't the mansion in Lekki, and it wasn't the life of luxury she had once known, but it was hers. It was filled with love, strength, and hope. As she held her child in her arms, watching the world outside, she knew she had won. Not because she had defeated Richard, but because she had learned to defeat her own fears, to rise above the brokenness he had left behind. She had come back, not for revenge, but for redemption, and in the process had found something far more valuable, her own dignity, her own power, and the future she deserved.